I appreciate everyone who is taking the time to come and go through this with me. So just a little bit of background to get us started. A little bit about me, you can read as well as I can. Don't need to talk about that with you. But what I do want to mention is that these experiences I have had in leading sales teams and starting in late 2012, there's this new thing at the time, at least new to a lot of us, sales enablement, that I was asked to go build by my EVP. And I've now done that globally at 3 companies. I've consulted with a lot of companies, and I've seen something very consistent. And that is with the right sales methodology. And by that, I mean truly customer centric, outward in, however you want to view it. You will create companies, teams I've worked with have created a competitive differentiator because they're not focused on features. They're not focused on the things that so often we get hung up with. And they're able to focus by focusing on the customer and understanding problems. And then some other techniques I'm going to show you. The customers, the prospects noticed. They told us that they noticed. They told our leaders that they interact with, they noticed. And so my goal here is to walk you through some of what I've learned. We don't have time to get into all of it, but my goal is to give you a few very specific takeaways you can start thinking about, and always happy to talk to anyone afterwards as well. The good news is this. In my experience, 25 years, there is not a single best sales methodology. But I mean, I've used multiple ones to achieve this competitive differentiator I talk about, but I've also discovered that not all of them are equal. So the other takeaway I'd like you to have today is when you're looking at methodologies, these are components that in my experience, you really want to make sure are included, no matter which one it is. So here's where we are. We're in 2024. No surprise to anybody. Win rates are down. Sales cycles are definitely not getting shorter. They're probably getting longer. At least a lot of people I work with, people I talk to. ASPs are struggling. Now, the last 2 things on here are not particularly new for 2024, but they're not helping either. Poor pipeline management. And there's a variety of ways you can poorly manage your pipeline. I'm going to touch on 1 or 2 today briefly, but that's not a new problem, but it is still one that many organizations have yet to solve for. And the last piece that I would suggest is not a new problem, but still impacts our success is that traditional viewpoint of selling. Convincing, persuading, overcoming objections. I mean, I realize that, yes, some degree we're doing some of that in the sales process, but I'm talking about it in the way that most of us have felt in a bad sales experience. Nobody likes to be convinced or persuaded of anything. And there is a better way that customers and prospects will respond to. My favorite John Maxwell quote is that the pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist expects it to change, and the leader adjusts the sails. So my goal today is to give you some ways to adjust the sails, SAILS, no pun intended there, and see some better success and results. Let's start with that first customer interaction. I get a lot of outreach. I imagine a lot of you get a lot of outreach. And this is still so prevalent in the companies that I'm working with and that try to sell to me. And that is they want an appointment and they want to show me a pitch deck and they want to show me a demo. In my experience, the demo is not the best way to start. Those of you that have read or are familiar with John Kerr's book, one of my favorites, Mastering Technical Sales, he's got a whole chapter in there on dashing to the demo. There's a lot of reasons not to do that, but the biggest one is it is not particularly customer centric. If we're honest, when we're demoing, especially before doing discovery, in that first meeting, it is going to be about us, our product, our company, the seller maybe. Pitch decks often are the same. Not saying there's not a place for a pitch deck, and it's probably later in the sales cycle. But what we have an opportunity to do is we're not going to waste the buyer's time. That's always a risk when we're showing a demo. We don't really understand what it is they're trying to accomplish. The other risk we have is we don't show something they're interested in, and they assume we either don't do it well or don't do it at all. So what is the better way? I loved the last session, Spencer, if you're still on, when you're talking about the experience and the outcomes that we really should be looking for in a proper discovery meeting. So I hit on a few of those right now for you. Remember what I said a minute ago, outside in. What is the prospect most focused on in this first part of the relationship? To be honest, they're focused a lot on the seller. Is that seller someone, we overemphasize relationships sometimes. And what I mean by that is prospects have friends. They don't need another friends. Out of the, I don't know how many opportunities and contracts I've sold over my career. And I've probably made friends with a handful of them, and that's great. But what people will look for in you, in a seller, is, are they transparent, authentic? Are they a serious person? Are they worth spending any time with? And then finally, can they help the prospect fix a problem or overcome something that's going on in their business that they haven't been able to figure out for themselves? If a relationship comes out of that, a friendship rather, that's great. But let's focus on being those first three things. So that starts with, don't be a waiter. When you go to a restaurant, you sit down, you order your food. The waiter might make a couple of suggestions, but generally they just go bring you back what you asked for. In sales, and I believe it's in the effort to provide great customer service, but we act too much like a waiter. And here's what I mean by that. Depending on whose research you read, buyers are making 60 to 70% of their evaluation before they ever talk to someone in sales. And how are they doing that? They're researching on the internet, they're going out to social, they're talking to their peers at other companies, and they're coming with a list. This is often coming with a list of what it is they've determined they need. Now, the problem with the list is they may or may not have found bad information online. That's always a possibility. But now they've engaged a seller. So I come in as the seller, and they're walking me through their list. Maybe my SDR got it for me. And so what do? I start demoing and start talking about what's on that list. What I didn't do is find out what the business drivers are behind the items that they have said they need, the features, the outcomes that they need. And by not doing that, I'm not adding any value to the conversation. I'm really not. I'm probably checking all the same boxes that my competition is going to check. And in a discovery environment, the buyer may come already having determined they need to make a change, or they might be even thinking about it. But there's two things need to happen during that meeting. One, they agree that the current situation is untenable and a change is necessary. Number two, they start to see why the change should be with you, your services, your product. And they do that through sellers with the business acumen to hold conversations that identify and uncover the gaps in the business, the cost of that current impact, the impact of the way they're doing things currently, what the future state is, what they need to get there, and what they feel, not what we think, not what our ROI calculator says, but what they feel will be the potential benefits to the organization. If we do that, the buyer will most often leave with the beginnings of a vision of how they're going to achieve that future state with what we've been talking about. We don't want to over-focus on product knowledge. We want to focus on problem knowledge. This is where that exceptional experience starts. This is where we would start to get feedback when rolling out this type of process at different companies where I've done it, where they would say things like, how did you teach your sellers to come in and talk to me at that level? Because I'm not used to that. I'm used to, them talking about features, and we knew we were on the right track and people responded to it. So rethink your discovery process. Number one, I would encourage. Number two, how are you qualifying opportunities? And I'm specifically talking about when they're coming into the top of a seller's funnel, whether it's partner sourced, SDR, BDR sourced, or self-sourced. We need a consistent set of criteria to identify what we believe is an actual opportunity that we can go sell, and we want to keep out the stuff that's not. A lot of companies still are using BANT. Let me just say quickly why I don't think it's BANT. What sellers need to get really good at is accessing authority, the A, and holding conversations and discovery and analysis with them that helps them validate that there's a need for what we have. But if we wait for somebody to also have budget and time frame, timeline in place, somebody's already influencing that deal, almost sure of that. But also, it just really limits who we talk to. So I suggest to you, it's better to get our sellers curious and get them the acumen and the training and enablement they need to go in and really understand what's going on in the business. And here's a better qualification criteria. If I finish a discovery meeting, I'm an AE, and I have put into my CRM what that current state of their business is, what the underlying causes for that are, what the impact is, what the future state is, and what potential benefit they see. Those are things that I can uncover in a first discovery meeting if I've been set up on how to do it well. Those tell me that that's a real opportunity. It may only be 10%, but it's certainly worth chasing. If they can't answer all or most of those questions, in my experience, it's not ready to go in their funnel. Maybe it stays in whatever stage you have that's pre-funnel for more development. Perhaps it's going to take a second conversation. But those of you that are sales leaders, be very jealous about what gets into your reps pipeline, because I think we all have seen once something gets in there, it takes a life of its own on. It's really difficult to get out. I think when I was at Vonage, we did some analysis. The oldest opportunity we found was 1,136 days old. We laughed. Does that seller expect something magical is going to happen on day 1137? And the really funny thing is I shared this story just last week, and a client I was on doing some methodology training and work with their group. And I mentioned that, and their CRO laughed and he said, ours is a lot higher than 1,137. So it's out there. Let's keep that funnel clean. The other benefit that you'll see is the bullet in the middle there: better working relationships between SDRs and AEs, less rock fights breaking out, because you know the drill. SDRs think the AEs just want to cherry pick everything. The AEs think the SDRs are only want to give them, anybody that fogs a mirror, they're going to make an appointment with them. If the organization has agreed on criteria like this, and it's what everyone's using, it becomes very clear whether or not that opportunity is ready to convert. You also avoid what I call the end of the quarter, end of the month, hook a brother up close, where the AE is under pressure to convert one or two more opportunities that they really aren't comfortable putting in their pipeline, but somebody they work with and care about is trying to hit their number for the quarter. Again, that's not helpful for anybody. What's our next critical element? Are we building an effective sphere of influence? Some people call this multi-threading, might be think of it as account management, but here's what my experience inside as a corporate executive, outside as a resource. We still are not doing discovery more than once or twice. Too many organizations consider discovery to be a one and done. And there are some problems with that. Let me start with the champion. How do you know that you have a champion? In my experience, number one, they are high enough in the organization, they can and will sit down with you to have that business conversation I just talked about. Number two, they have the ability and the willingness to introduce you and get you meetings with the other decision makers. Now, if they can't do or won't do those things, you may have a coach, you may have an influencer or something else, but you don't have a champion. But once you've determined that you have a champion, you need access to those other key players. And I think we sometimes minimize just what a big ask that is. Even if you have just had an exceptional discovery session with them, you've followed up with an amazing follow-up email, they still don't know you very well. And you're now asking for them to introduce you to a peer or possibly even an executive that they report to, or higher up in the organization somewhere. It's kind of a big deal. But if we're coming in and taking the approach that I'm advocating for here, two things happen. One, they should have felt that you're not a salesy. You did not come in with that salesy approach, and we're a different sort of person to talk to in that first meeting. Number two, if you've done a good job of helping them define a gap and what that cost of that gap is if they don't solve for it, they're much more confident in bringing and asking other people to meet with you, because now they have a business case to show them. If we don't take the time to meet with these other decision makers, do discovery, understand what they're looking for, we best case leave money on the table, because we go in, we focus on one or two things that we sell. We don't identify just how wide the gap is, the chasm is, whatever you want to call it. And so we lose opportunity to sell. Worst case, we don't win at all because we didn't identify somebody who was in there and we needed to talk to, and for whatever reason we didn't, and they also have the power to say no. So let's be thoughtful about getting those introductions and thoughtful about the meetings that we're having once we've gotten them. Deal velocity, sales cycles, I just hear this over and over, are slowing down. A mutual plan may not be the thing that completely fixes it, but you will see nothing but good come from having that in place. Some of you might call it a mutual close plan, a sequence of events. I don't think of it as a mutual close plan, because to me, that's not what we were trying to do with this. Ultimately, of course, we're going to ask for the business, but this should be an honest evaluation. The challenge I've seen when organizations start to implement this is they do it too early in the process. They haven't earned the right for it. And so then it does feel pushy and transactional, and people tend to not want to do it. So I want to suggest to you a different way to get it in place. I've just talked about what the goals of a proper discovery should be. I've talked about the need to go and cover with all the key players, all the decision makers, have that same level of discovery. My champion and I now have cataloged what those decision makers are all trying to accomplish, what the impact is that they would see to the business by not changing, what the positive impact they would see if that change does get made. So my champion is now going to organize a meeting. Say there's 4 decision makers, the champion plus 3 others. So he's going to organize a meeting for the 5 of us. When I come into the meeting, I'm going to co-run it with my champion, and I'll start with him because he's the first person I talk to and say, Bill, thank you for bringing me into this opportunity. When we first met a few weeks ago, this is what you told me the organization is trying to solve for. This is the problem with things the way they are. Here's the potential benefit, and here's what you felt you needed to get it. Has anything changed? Now, he's my champion, so I've probably been in touch with him. I know nothing's changed, but I want to be sure. Now I'm going to turn to Sue because she's the second person I talk to. I'm going to ask her the same question, and then Liz, and then finally Alex. Think about the power of that. Number one, I'm validating that we're all still in parallel. We're right. I heard what I thought. I heard them. They felt heard. But they're also hearing their peers validate it, and probably for the first time. And it's a very powerful opportunity to then suggest the next logical step based on what they've all just confirmed is to put in place a sequence of events or a mutual plan so that both parties, both companies can make sure that all pieces of an evaluation are hit and then it really is the right fit. The other mistake that I often see sellers make when implementing this concept is they forget to own that process. Here's what I mean. Milestones are set and agreed to, but despite everybody's best efforts, milestones will slip. And I've seen sellers that think that their champion will probably go in and get the new date for that milestone that was missed and then adjust all the other dates. And I don't know if it ever happens, but it rarely does it. That's your job. If you're the seller, work with your champion, set the new milestone date that we feel we can hit, then cascade the dates and get the document back out to all of the folks that are working in it. Otherwise, it becomes useless. That's my tip on that. Now, we've gone through these at a very high level, but for me, none of this is theory. I've executed it. My teams have executed it. I've coached sellers through it as a sales leader, as an enablement leader. This stuff makes a difference, even now. So we're not going to change what's going on in 2024. But like Maxwell says, we're going to adjust the sales. So now we should have sellers. We should be developing sellers that can use business acumen to uncover quantifiable problems. We should be able to reduce and manage our sales cycle better through both effective account penetration and also effective mutual plans that the champion and your seller and the sales engineer typically going to own together. Next one, ASP, if anything, I don't know why it would go down, but you should see it stabilize or go up, because when sellers don't go in assuming they know what product that a prospect needs, they don't lead with that product, then they are curious enough to uncover additional problems, which usually means a more comprehensive quote and a better outcome for the buyer. And finally, there's a lot of benefits, selfishly speaking, when we get good as an organization at looking at where the buyer is in their journey and getting dependable inputs from them that tell us where they are in their evaluation. Our forecasting can't help but go up. Now, I promised you we'd wrap up with me sharing the number one attribute that I see over and over again in consistent sellers. And it's this: they own it. They're proud of being a salesperson. They've honed their craft. They've developed themselves. They understand their ICPs. They understand the problems that they deal with, and they understand how what they sell helps others solve that problem. But they come in, hold themselves up as equal.